Well, good evening, and I'm Slim Overton, and welcome to Boston Coffee Talks Evening Edition show, the place to be for informative conversations. How about that? Well, anyway, we're here tonight, and the show, the Thursday nights, are always usually featuring Leah Drake Stitt, who is the host commentator for that, but she won't be here tonight. But we do have our co-host and the host and moderator of the Monday morning shows, Thomas the Colonel Chapman. Hello, cuz. How you
Hey,
doing?
what's up? All right now.
All right. So we're here tonight. We have a special guest, but he's special, but he's not. He's a recurring guest for us, Dr. Bruce Copeland. And I'll tell you a little bit about him, administrator for the Hampton City Schools, where he's the coordinator for School of Social Workers Services and is an adjunct professor at the Norfolk State University. There's a lot more to his resume, but I'm gonna stop right there. But good evening, Dr. Bruce Copeland. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for always coming back and joining us here and sharing your knowledge. We're going to talk a little bit about homelessness tonight and the housing stock in the city and around the country. And the title, Who's Homeless? We want to know, well, Doctor, I'll let you start your presentation. I don't want to get into the presentation. I'll let you start exactly what we mean by who's homeless.
Okay, good. I will start by simply thinking about and sharing with you some of the things that we traditionally believe about homeless. So most of us can account, have an account of many stories of where we encounter homeless people, typically standing maybe in the median on the road asking for food or money to help. As a matter of fact, I got off on the exit to Victory Boulevard that runs right past the casino coming from my direction of Suffolk. And there was an individual, a man and a lady, standing in the median. And I noticed that they went near the underpass and went into the bushes. And then when I turned the corner, I could see that there was a tent right under the highway. And that's where they were actually living. So we can recognize those people. We can recognize those people who we see on the street, maybe pushing a supermarket cart and all of their belongings are in the cart. There's a gentleman that sleeps on the sidewalk in front of my office building. And when I tell you there's a pile of blankets, but at this very moment, if you were to go there, you would see him sleeping on the street. Nobody bothers him. He doesn't bother anybody. And we drive by this gentleman every day and treat him like he's a piece of furniture with no value. He's just
There's
there.
a picture there.
Yeah, we don't acknowledge him. We don't offer the support. We just accept his existence there at that location. So those are the people we know about. There's a whole segment of people in our society who are homeless that you may not know about. And in particular, I wanted to talk with you about children who are homeless in our nation. One of the tasks that I have in my career, my job that I currently have is that we're supposed to provide support to children who are in schools all across the nation who are experiencing homelessness. Now, we don't refer to the individuals as homeless students or homeless people. We refer to them as children because we want to put the child first in our language and how we view things who are experiencing homeless because the child does have value. So one of the things we're supposed to do is to make sure that the school division provides all the support that they're required to provide as part of a federal law and a mandate called McKinney-Vento. So if your listeners haven't heard about this before, or they would want to inquire further about what that is, I will explain to them. But if they're going to look it up or Google it or anything like that, they should look up the term McKinney, which is McKinney -Vento, VENTO. The name came from two individuals who were congressmen or senators, I can't remember, but they were in the federal government as legislators, and they came together to create this legislation that would protect children who are in the public schools who are homeless. I could give you a lot of examples of what we've encountered from children who actually live in an automobile and they sleep there and they move the car from location to location, but they truly do not have a home. People living in campers and tents in the woods, those types of things. We even had one situation where a student was living on a boat. Now, it wasn't the big luxury boats that we take vacation on, but this was just a boat that wasn't in good repair, but it was a place where they could dock and they would use a public shower and those types of things. So what I wanted to talk to you about is the definition of homelessness, and then tell you a little bit about how we identify children who are homeless, because you may have people in your family at this very moment who are homeless and you don't consider them homeless, but they are, according to this definition that we have. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. Okay. And so we'll start with a couple questions I want you to think about. Ask yourself this: could you experience a flood or fire or tornado or some other natural disaster? I remember many years ago, we had this tornado in Suffolk. You may remember if you've been here all your life. And I have a home, and quite a bit of damage was done, to the degree that some homes were completely blown off its foundation. So although I had a good job and everything else, technically I was considered homeless because of how I lost my primary residence. Do you work in an area of economic in an economic job market where the job might become obsolete? You could lose your job. Could you suffer from a long-term illness? That's another way people become homeless. Doctor's bills, medical bills. You have a home one day and the next day you don't have one because you can't pay all that you owe, without proper health benefits or compensation. So many people do have jobs, but they don't have proper health care or compensation. And when they don't go to work, they don't get paid. So when you don't go to work and don't get paid, you can't pay your mortgage, your rent, you lose your house. Do you live in a household with only one full-time wage earner? I've been in a household with two full-time wage earners for a long time. So I can't imagine if I had to do whatever I had to do without the partnership that I have with my spouse. Are you behind in your monthly bills already? You're one paycheck away from foreclosure, from eviction. Are housing costs in your area increasing faster than wages? And does anyone in your family struggle with addiction or drugs? A lot of the homeless people that we see on the street always tell people, no one wants to be homeless. No one wants to be. And so for a person to be out on the street that the way that we see them sometimes, and but not all the time. So I don't want people to think that everybody that's on the street has a drug addiction, but some do. Some have a mental health concern. And some are there, and they don't have either one. No drug addiction, no mental health. They just simply lost their housing and they have nowhere to go. And there's not a lot of affordable housing in the area. I haven't been a renter. I think I rented myself as an adult 1 year my entire life. Other than that time, I've been a homeowner. But I have an adult daughter who graduated from college not long ago, and she's renting $1,600 for a one-bedroom apartment. And you can imagine what a two-bedroom apartment would be, etc. So rent is astronomically high, much higher than what a minimum wage earner would earn. So those are some of the things you should think about when it comes to when you ask yourself, could I become homeless? You certainly could. A lot of people could. I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people could. So many of the risk factors for being homeless include poverty. Clearly, that makes the most sense. the least amount of income you have, the more vulnerable you are to becoming homeless. Substance abuse, domestic violence. Some people leave their home because living on the street or not knowing where I'm going to go is better than being in a situation where they're being abused. Mental illness, of course, we talked about that, the lack of affordable housing, and the economic crisis. Inconsistent and inadequate health care or nutrition. And then also, adolescent mothers are at high risk for being homeless, and disruptive or limited family support. Now, you might not recognize this, but one of the largest segments of our community who are most vulnerable or at risk for becoming homeless, as it relates to children, are those who are members of the LGBTQ community. And you can imagine that if they are part of that community in the Black community, they have double trouble because one, they already have a sexual orientation that is viewed by many people as being deviant. But then when you add the Black church and the Black community to that, you are really challenged in that way. So a lot of times children are put out of their own home. Their parents don't want to accept their lifestyle or accept them, and they become homeless as a result. So again, the act that I'm referring to, the McKinney-Vento Act, is from 1987. And what it did, it says that it provides the state with funding. Now, I want people to hear this, that the states have funding to help these children. School divisions have funding to help children who are experiencing homelessness, and to support local grants and statewide initiatives. So there's money available from the federal government to the state that trickles down into the school divisions to help these children. And what the law requires is that students be given access to school, that they be allowed to attend every day, and that we are concerned about them being successful in school. Now, in the beginning, when this act was first put into place, the two main things they were concerned about was access and attendance. Success was not a concern. But through the reauthorization of this federal legislation, legislators are saying we don't only want to see children who are experiencing homelessness in school every single day and that they have access to the schoolhouse. We want to make sure that they achieve academically. So that is a additional emphasis that has been placed on school divisions to be concerned about. Now, you might say, well, we gave some examples of how you might become homeless, but then the question is, who are homeless children? How do we identify them? We use a definition that is consistent with what we call IDEA, individuals with disabilities. In that definition, it references IDEA. It references the Child Nutrition Act. It references the Head Start Act, higher education, and child care block grants. So that legislation references those things in the legislation. But the way we determine if a child is homeless is this: if the individual lacks a fixed residence. And what we mean by fixed is this: that the residence can't be moved. So if you live in a house or an apartment, houses and apartments don't move, but cars move, trailers move. You can move your tent, you can move your boat, but a house or an apartment, etc., can't be moved. So we want to our definition would be: does this child lack a fixed residence? The next thing is the residence regular? And what it means by regular is that, okay, you have a fixed residence, but can you go there every day, day after day after day, or do you have to move? So an example would be this: we have something called a night's welcome in Hampton, and how that works is that during the coldest months of the year, a group of churches get together and say, you can come and stay in our church and sleep on a cot, I guess in some room of the church, for 5 nights. At the end of that 5 nights, you have to move to another church. Stay there for 5 nights, then you move to another church. And it's only during the coldest months of the year. So that means mothers, children, whoever, they come to those places. And that's how we try to keep them safe during the winter months. That particular situation, although it's fixed, is not regular because you can't go back and forth to that same church over and over. You have to keep moving from one place to another. And then the next criteria for determining if a child would meet the definition of being homeless is if you live in a residence, is the residence adequate? So an example would be you live in a house, it is fixed and it's regular, but there are no utilities because you can't afford the lights. The water has been cut off, the lights have been cut off. So at the end of the school day, the child goes home to a fixed residence and a regular residence, but it's not adequate. No one can live in a situation comfortably where there's no utilities, no water, no lights, no heat, no air during the hottest months of the year. So again, I just explained to those three things to you is what we look for. And then the next thing is children and youth whose primary nighttime residence, if they live in an emergency shelter or transitional shelter, they're considered homeless. That's pretty clear. But let me tell you, some people may not know what transitional shelter means. Transitional shelter means that they may be living in a house or an apartment that's owned by some community-based organization, and they're there temporarily as a means of establishing a plan to find more permanent housing. But that particular location, you come, you stay for a while, and then hopefully you move out. If you're in that situation, you're considered homeless. Or if you're in an emergency shelter or domestic violence shelter or anything like that, you would be considered homeless. If you're living in a place that's not designated for ordinary or regular accommodations. So if you find somewhere, what's a place that's open? Give an example. The casino in Portsmouth is open 24 hours a day. You have an ID, you can go in there. They have some really nice, comfortable seats where you can watch the ball game. But if you come in there day after day after day, you're not really gambling, but you're sitting in the seat and you're taking a nap. You're using their restroom facilities. And no one knows that you're homeless, but you're just hanging around, hoping not to be observed. But that gets you inside a building where it has heat, air, and you are protected from the elements. That place is not meant to accommodate people who need housing and sleep. So if you're in anything that's not meant for ordinary housing, then you would be considered
like the
homeless.
library.
Like the library. In the old days, Slim, when we had bus stations and places like you sleep there, you can't go to Walmart and sleep on the one bench that they might have next to customer service. These places are not meant for people to sleep. The other thing, the last thing is if you're sleeping in a car, you're sleeping in a park, you're sleeping in public spaces or abandoned buildings or substandard housing, a bus station or train station or any similar place where you can just get in because they're open to the public, but it's not meant for people to sleep there, you will be considered homeless. Now, another place that would make you homeless is if you're sleeping in a hotel or motel. In our city, we have a lot of people on Mercury Boulevard in Hampton at in-town suites and various places that you and I probably would not stay. Motels. Most of the times they're not in hotels, but they're in motels. These places, if they're living there because they lost their housing as a result of economic hardship, they were escaping domestic violence, or they were evicted, and as a result, they end up in a hotel or a motel. I had a lady call me recently, and she was asking for some financial assistance to make it one more week at the motel. And I asked her how much was she paying, and she was paying $400 a week. So $400 a week, Slim, that's $1,600 a month. The question becomes, well, why can't she just get her an apartment? Well, she can't get an apartment because she has bad credit. She has an eviction on her record, and nobody would give her a chance. And they're struggling each week to come up with the $400. The other thing is, when they live in hotels and motels, they don't have a light bill, a gas bill, or a water bill, no type of electric bill. So they pay the $400, everything is covered, including cable television. All of that is included. And the only thing they would have to worry about from that point is to make sure that they eat every day. Sometimes these places are efficiencies, and they might have a cooking facility there in the room. Oftentimes you'll find an individual parent with all 5 of her kids in one hotel or motel room. Those persons would be considered homeless. So usually whenever we get someone to apply for services and they tell us that they're living in a motel, we basically automatically consider them homeless. Usually they're there because they were evicted. Now, this is the group where some of your family members could be homeless and you never thought that they were because of the living situation. It's called being doubled up. And what that means is, if you have a sister, Colonel, and she's a single mom with a couple of kids, and she gets evicted, and you say, well, I'm not going to have my sister on the street. You just come here. I have a spare bedroom, and you all can stay here until you get reestablished.
Mm-hmm.
To most people, she wouldn't be considered homeless because she's in a house that's adequate, comfortable, heating and air. I'm sure Colonel has a place that would be comfortable if he invited his sister to be there. But technically, by this law, she's considered homeless because there are 2 families living in a home that is meant for one.
Right.
That's what makes her homeless. And then the question would be, if she's in one bedroom with her 2 or 3 kids, then it's not adequate. Or if they're at the Colonel's house and he had a blow-up mattress and the kids slept there and his sister slept on the sofa, it's not adequate, and they're considered homeless. And the situation in which they live is considered temporary. It's not meant for her to stay there with her brother. It's not meant for her to stay there with her brother indefinitely. It's a temporary fix to her having lost her housing. So most students that we have in our division, and most of them in Portsmouth, I work with the person in Portsmouth because our students go back and forth between school divisions sometimes. And Portsmouth has as big of a problem with this as any other city. You just don't recognize these children as being homeless because I'm living with my grandmother. I'm living with my uncle. I'm living with another relative. But it's 2 families in a home meant for one. Some people are living with a relative in Section 8 housing, which we know is against the rules. Some people are living with, some sons and daughters are living with their parent, mother or father in senior citizen subsidized housing, which they're not supposed to do. Some people are living in apartments with relatives where they're not on the lease, which they're not supposed to do. So therefore, those families would be considered homeless. And the other thing is that we look at whether those families could be asked to leave at any time. So you can be a loving relative and invite your sister to come. And one day you have a blow up and she's told to get out and take her kids and her belongings. And she has to go. They definitely meet the criteria for being homeless. You going to say something,
Dr.
sir?
Copeland,
Yes.
let me ask, and Colonel, I know he's been taking a lot of notes, so I know he has some things he wants to say. But I just want to ask, with all you mentioned, and you think about as they count the number of homeless people that are out there, the concentration are the people like you mentioned that you step over going to work or that are out on the street. So that number is underrepresented, especially when you come to the point where elected officials try to put those numbers together when they try to put out funding for homeless people. So the funds might be less than what's really needed because the real definition of who's homeless is not addressed. Would you say?
Yeah. Now, with the Virginia Department of Education, we're required to report how many students we have in our school division who are experiencing homelessness. Every school division is required to do that. But when we keep our records, we keep a record of how many families we have and how many children we have. Because you could have 200 families and 800 children if each family has 2 children or more. So the count, we give them a count for the number of children and the number of families experiencing homelessness. And Portsmouth has to do that as well. And it could be underrepresented because some families don't even know that they're homeless. When you go to live with your mother, you don't know that you're homeless. You assume that this is what people do. We return home when we get evicted. We come back to our mother's house when the boyfriend has been abusive to us and we don't want to be killed by him. So we just go back to mom's house. But when you do that, when those things happen, if you have proper information, because one of the things that we have to do is to educate the community and educate the school division about homelessness of these students. So we're supposed to go out into the community and say, and help people understand what makes a person homeless. Another thing, another group of children, Slim, has to do with the migratory children who migrate for work purposes. That might be some of the Hispanic families that we see, some of the families that are coming from other countries. When people come from other countries and they're coming here because they're refugees, they're trying to escape persecution or mistreatment in another country, and they show up here. Even children who come here and cross the border, we don't have a border right here in Virginia, but in other places where they come across the border, those children have to be enrolled in school. This whole thing about being, I don't like the term illegal, but undocumented does not apply here. We're supposed to have those children to come in school. Another time where we had an influx of children entering into our schools was way back when we had Katrina. And the people in New Orleans, some of those people left and never went back to New Orleans. They winded up in various states throughout the country. And when they came to Virginia, we were under a mandate to enroll them in school immediately. And they were considered homeless because of how they lost their home. Another population of students that we have, Slim, are a group of students called unaccompanied youth. And I'm gonna tell you something very interesting about that particular population. An unaccompanied youth is a child who's not in the care or custody of their mother or father because of the reasons that we discussed before. Maybe they were put out. Maybe the parents said, your behavior is too bad. I no longer want you here. Basically put the child out. A lot of people can't rationalize that when, we're middle class people, we raised our children, they did good and they make us proud. We don't know anything about putting children out like that. But believe me, there are a lot of people in our community who put their children out on the street. They will sleep on the sofa of the neighbor, or they have a buddy who's on the basketball team and he says, you can come stay at my house, sleep on the floor in my bedroom. And we don't know about those children. They're kind of like invisible because their stories don't include them sleeping on the street, but they're considered homeless. Now, this is a good thing I want your listeners to know about is when you're considered an unaccompanied youth, you can have the person who's in your district that does the same thing that I do, write you a letter to FAFSA. If you are college bound, that letter will prompt FAFSA to consider only your income, not the income of your parents. And when they do that, you generally open the gate to full financial aid. An example, I have a young man who called us probably in the month of April and said he wanted to go to college, had been accepted in college. He showed us the acceptance letter. One of the things that I said, I wonder if this kid actually has the grades, because a lot of our children who are experiencing homelessness and who have experienced it for years have problems with attendance, have problems with academics, and have problems with behavior. So I said, well, is this another one of our kids who wants to go to college, but he doesn't have the grades? Well, he showed me the letter that he was accepted. And when I checked his grades, he had like a 3.6 grade point average, but he was not in the care or the custody of his mother or his father. He was living with a friend. His mother left town. So when I gave that to him, He ended up, I'll tell you, he goes to Virginia State. When I gave him that letter, Virginia State gave him nearly 95% financial aid. He went to college and didn't have to pay anything. I talked with him about 2 or 3 days ago and asked him how was homecoming, how's he doing, and he's doing great. But it's because of that letter. So a lot of children don't know if they're college bound, but they're considered unaccompanied youth, meaning they're homeless and they're not in the care and custody of their parents. They can be eligible for full financial aid. We did that for another student at Norfolk State. Also,
Wow, that's good to know.
yeah. Also, as it relates to students who are living on college campuses, you may not realize how many students are on college campuses who are homeless. When Thanksgiving comes, they have nowhere to go. When Christmas time comes, they have nowhere to go. Some colleges even have services where they will leave dorm rooms open so they don't have to leave. They will find somewhere for them to go during the holiday, because being homeless and on campus is a real thing. And I don't think people realize that. Some people are barely in college financially and academically, and a lot of them are homeless. So this young man that we helped to get into college, we've already arranged and spoke with the officials there, say he may not have a place to go. And they say, well, we have support for him if that is the case. But that's a good thing to know for those students who are experiencing homelessness, who want to go to college and don't know what to do, how they're going to make it.
Colonel, I think Colonel.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Interesting discussion. So we've in election season now, and you mentioned a lot of this is based on the public school system. Now, so if I'm I'm homeschooled, I start off homeschool, and one of these situations hit me, how am I covered under there? Or I'm going to a private school and all of a sudden mom and daddy, or now we're homeless and I'm private school. And I know the private school, in my opinion, is going to cut you loose as fast as soon as that first tuition check don't arrive on time. So who picks up that group of kids?
No one. Because if you're in private school, unless you're there on some type of scholarship, you have a family that's low income, but the child is so smart, the private school says you can send them here on scholarship. Normally, people who have their children in private school pay for it. The Department of Education does not provide services to private school students generally. Now, if they're a student with a disability, they might be able to come into the school for a particular service, then return to private school. Homeschool is the same thing. The interesting thing about homeschool, because our office manages homeschool too, and there are a lot of parents who are homeschooling. Some of our parents who are economically disadvantaged homeschool their children. And when they come to the office to complete the application for homeschool, sometimes I kind of shake my head thinking that you're not going to be able to do this. But we can't judge and we can't deny them their rights. The Homeschool Association, the laws are clear. They will take you to court and sue the entire school division if you try to regulate homeschool in any way. It is so easy to homeschool your child. All you have to do is to tell the school that you're going to do it. You can write a one-sentence statement. I'll be homeschooling my child this year. That's all that's required. Then you may need to only show them maybe a copy of a high school diploma. That's it. And say, I'm going to teach them reading, writing, and math, and they're free to homeschool for the entire school year. We have no oversight over what they do, what they're taught. Now, at the end of the year, we might ask them to provide evidence of progress, which is a simple test that they would take on their own, and they would just give us the results, and that's it. There are some parents who do a great job of homeschooling. Some of these middle-class parents who do this stuff, they do it like experts. But it kind of saddens me a little bit when I see our economically disadvantaged parents who barely got out of high school themselves deciding that they're going to homeschool their child because they simply don't want their child to go to a certain school, or they don't want to be, they don't want to send them at all. They're truant. So they use homeschool as a way to get around going to court.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing is in Virginia, for an example, this was a couple years ago. The percentage of people who were doubled up, and that's where when you have your sister come live with you, we call that doubled up. You're living with a relative, was about 68%. 68% of our children who are identified as homeless, they were in a doubled up situation. 20% of our children who were considered homeless, they were living in hotels and motels. Those are our two biggest categories: living with a relative and being in a hotel or motel. The third largest category was about 11%. Those people were living in shelters and transitional housing. And thank God it's only 1%. I wish it was 0%, but 1% of those people are unsheltered, meaning they're living in a car, on the street, in a tent in the woods, those types of things. So that's just a little bit of statistic for you as it relates to the largest percentage of people are considered to be doubled up. Now, yes.
So what's going to happen? Okay, today the Department of Education on the federal level doles out our taxpayer dollars to the state, and the state doles out money to municipalities and cities or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So under the proposal that Mr. Trump wants to do to eliminate the Department of Education, and I think in this broad 2025 project is to block grant that money to the states, which gets rid of all federal regulations. And so so when they get in, and it'll be less money going to the school systems anyway, because they don't want to have an educated populace out here. So when the money is doled out from this, depending on the state, that percentage that goes to the private schools, and it'll be less than money going to the public schools. And so as a backfeeder thing, we'll have to pay more real estate taxes for one. What happens to programs that you're trying to follow now?
Well, who knows?
Even less money or no money to help these kids.
Who knows what'll happen when Trump comes into, if he comes into office, which I hope he doesn't. I pray. But I will tell you, if God forbid that were to happen, I'm sure we would have a real crisis on our hands, a real challenge. But people should remember that education is a function of the state. It's a function of the state. That's why Virginia can do things differently than North Carolina can do. And a lot of people see public education as a federal function. It's not. Even though we have the Department of Education, this is how the Department of Education has power over states and over schools. They have power this way. For instance, the state of Virginia does not have to honor anything that was previously associated with No Child Left Behind. We remember that under the Bush administration.
Leave all the children behind.
Yeah, the state of Virginia can say, we're not honoring any of that stuff that you say with No Child Left Behind. We're not doing any of these tests, that these mandated tests that you have to do. And the federal government will say, you're right, you don't have to do it. But the money we were going to give you, we're not going to give you the money. So what the federal government does and the Department of Education is that if you don't do what they say, they withhold money from the state. And if the federal dollars are withheld from the state would hardly be able to fund public education. So we're in a relationship. It's almost like a woman staying in a marriage with a man because he makes a lot of money. And if she leaves him, she won't have that money. So in this situation, it's the same thing with the schools. The state of Virginia does what it does in order to keep federal dollars, but they don't have to. They can reject the federal dollars if they feel like, as a state, they can do it without the federal dollars. Most states can't do it without the federal dollars, and most states don't refuse the money. They do exactly what they're told by the Department of Education. But technically, the Department of Education does not have any jurisdiction over schools in the state of Virginia, because public education is a function of the state. You get into a marriage with the federal government because you want their money. That's why it looks like the federal government controls public education in the state of Virginia. Technically, they don't, but you want their money, you're going to do what they tell you to do.
No, it's interesting. And then you made a comment saying the states or the state government is the main responsibility for public education.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see where schools, especially in the South, where they put their emphasis at,
mm-hmm.
where the good schools are at, usually up north and anything below the Dixie line. When you further go down south, they don't believe in education. When you look at the states of Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, they always vie for who's going to be last in what I call the bottom five in all the educational statistics across the nation. And you mentioned how the money is doled out. Look at at Mississippi, where used to be Brett Favre, and the governor there siphoned off money for Brett Favre's daughters so they can build a soccer
That's right.
stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but he'll never do a dime or a day in prison,
mm-hmm.
because, when Congress wants to investigate him, all of a sudden he says, I've got CTE, or I've got dementia for having so many hits
mm-hmm.
in my head while I'm out there. And then, so that was the last of that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
He'll get away scot-free.
Uh-huh. Yeah, those things can be done because, like I said, it's a function of the state. If you look at what DeSantis does in Florida about the books and all this kind of stuff, they can do that because they're not violating federal law. This is what the state can do. But I would add this thing for you, and so in case we run out of time, so I get this through to you, I need parents to know and the community to know that every single school division in the United States of America has to follow this law. No one is exempt from the McKinney-Vento law that protects students experiencing homelessness. You also should remember that the one of the things that we are concerned about is a daily attendance. We want these students in school every day, and we want them to have school stability. What was being done before this law, Colonel, was this: if you lived in Portsmouth and you got evicted and you had to go to Hampton to live with your sister, Portsmouth would say, okay, enroll in Hampton City Schools. You enroll in Hampton from your sister's address, then you and your sister have a big fight. And then you have to go live with your brother in Virginia Beach. Then Hampton says, go to Virginia Beach and enroll your children there. Something happens there and you have to go to Suffolk. Virginia Beach says, go to enroll in Suffolk. What was happening is that students were being bounced from school to school to school, from city to city, and their education was disrupted. They could not have a consistent learning environment, and they began to lag behind in their attendance, lag behind in their academics. Some schools would not even let them in. So they would be home for days, weeks, or months trying to figure out, how can I get into a school? Nobody will let me in. They say, well, I don't have a birth certificate. I don't have an address in this city. We can't enroll you. Now, let's go back. You started off in Portsmouth where you were evicted, went to live with your sister in Hampton. By law, Portsmouth, at their expense, not at the expense of the parent, has to send transportation from Portsmouth to Hampton at the sister's house, pick the kids up, bring them back to Portsmouth so they can attend school every day at no expense to the parent. Portsmouth cannot say you cannot stay in our school division because you are temporarily living with your sister in Hampton. The law says Portsmouth doesn't have a choice.
Okay.
And
hope the right people heard that.
And the other thing is this. Now, the parent has a choice. The parent could say, well, I know I have a right to stay in Portsmouth, but there's a school right across the street from my sister's house in Hampton, so I really would rather enroll there. The parent has that choice, not the school. It's the
Mhm.
parent's choice. Now, the reason why school stability is important is because when a child has lost a home, I've never been homeless, but if you've ever been homeless and you lost a home, that's traumatic. So now you're going to cause that child to have to lose their school community. If you think of school as a community, you have teachers that you know and teachers that know you. You have friends. You're on the soccer team. You're on the debate team at the school. You're on the football team. You know the principal. It's this year is your year to go to the prom. And to lose that, in addition to losing your primary home, and you have to be pushed into another community where you don't know anybody, the law protects children from having to do that. They do not have to leave their school. And if that mother who got evicted when she was in Portsmouth bounced to 4 or 5 different cities, Portsmouth is obligated to send transportation to every single city she gets bounced to as long as she's displaced. And provide the only exception would be if some places like Richmond, they wouldn't have to do that because the distance is unreasonable. But I always say in the 757, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Suffolk, Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, they can go to any of those cities and move around as much as they want. And the school division has to provide the transportation at their own cost. The other thing, these children are, they can have absences waived because of their homeless situation. They can, they're entitled to all free meals offered by the school without completing any type of form. I don't know if any of your listeners remember back in the old days when you had lunch tickets, when you had to fill out a form every year. I believe that form was green. It was some green paper every year, and you had to be approved for the free or reduced lunch. With children who are experiencing homelessness, they don't have to be approved for anything. They can walk in on day one and receive those free meals without completing any paperwork. Also, this is another thing they should know. Let's say, now you can imagine, you got evicted when you were in Portsmouth and you had to put your stuff in storage. Or you couldn't afford the storage and you had to leave certain stuff behind. The landlord came behind you, cleaned up the unit, and threw all your stuff away. Or you're living with, or you escaping domestic violence. Your boyfriend is mistreating you, and you leave. You leave the children's birth certificates behind. You leave their shot records. You leave their ID. And those are the documents normally you need to enroll in school. Well, under McKinney-Vento, a family that's experiencing homelessness does not have to have any of that stuff to enroll in school. They can walk in the school, they can get evicted today, walk in the school building, a new school building tomorrow, where they live temporarily, and enroll. If the person says, well, we need your birth certificate, they simply need to say, no, you don't. My family is homeless, and by law, I don't have to have any of that information to enroll my child today. Now, I'll work on trying to get that information for you. Give me some time, but you cannot deny my child enrollment because I don't have a birth certificate. And those are protective factors that are in place with this law.
Do you have numbers on
I'd
those?
like to tell everybody that's watching, please make sure you share this information to your friends and family. And I just wanted to ask this in general about homelessness. You know, you were talking earlier about states' rights, and Colonel mentioned about certain states, and states can do certain things. You have certain states around the country that are implementing these homeless camping bans. And now the Supreme Court is going to be stepping in to decide whether that's cruel or not. But that's a whole nother story about the Supreme Court, and we mentioned Trump and all that mess. But do you think that's a good way? And I think a lot of them are doing this. A lot of the cities or states are doing it for the cities where they're camping in downtowns and cities. I think it's aesthetics or something like that. But it's still affecting homeless people and families. Do you think that's the correct way for the states or the cities to be addressing homelessness by banning them from, or maybe giving them an area somewhere? I think one state gave them an area somewhere isolated somewhere where they could do their camping thing. But you think that's the best way for them to be handling that because it makes the city look bad, but the people are still homeless.
I, I'm a social worker, so you got to understand how my
Yeah.
is through which I see life. I absolutely don't think it's the best way. If you want to give them something, give them a living wage. If you
Mhm.
want to give them something, give people substance abuse treatment who need it. If you want to give them something, give people affordable housing. Give people the mental health care that they need. When you
Mhm.
talk about giving them a area to sleep on the ground, I think that we are better as human beings and as a society. And no one in America should be without getting their basic needs met. And because we're the freest and the wealthiest nation on earth, and if you're experiencing homelessness in this country, it's because the system is designed to make sure that the haves maintain what they have and the
Yeah.
have-nots have not. So we have to do something about this political, social, and economic injustice. Um, and I ask my students sometimes at the university where I teach, I ask them this. I say, do you think social programs are designed to lift people up out of poverty or just to make them feel comfortable being in poverty? So our laws, if you have the right laws and policies in place, nobody wants to be homeless.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to be homeless. These people on the street, they don't want to be homeless. I mean, it's not even logical. It's like the reason why we hospitalize people who are suicidal because it's not normal to want to kill yourself. That's a red flag. If you want to kill yourself, then you have a mental health problem. If you want to be homeless and live on the street and not have access to having your basic needs met, then you have some type of concern that is not just it doesn't have to do with your will or your character. You're probably not a healthy person psychologically. So generally, nobody wants to be homeless. But when a person works 40, 50, 60 hours a week at McDonald's, but they don't have any health benefits, they don't have any child care, and they cannot afford at a minimum wage to rent an apartment. They just can't afford it because the housing prices are through the roof. And most of us, some of us have good jobs and everything and want to buy a house, but we can't buy a house because we can't afford the down payment and the house prices are too high. I saw some new construction nearby me, houses. They look nice, but they were starting at $400,000. And
Yeah.
rent is 15, 16, 1700, $2,000 for one bedroom. And a lot of our people who are living below the poverty line, they just cannot afford it. No matter how hard they work, no matter how much overtime they get, no matter how many jobs they have. They might have sometimes they're unskilled. They'll work at McDonald's, and then after they finish there, they'll go work at Pizza Hut. And even though they're hardworking people, they just do not get paid enough in minimum wage to be able to afford very basic housing, not the fancy stuff that some of us enjoy, but just the basic stuff they can't
Yeah.
afford. So,
I,
but yeah, just remember those things about our school kids, and none of our children should have to be out of school because they're homeless. We can waive a lot. We can also, for our high school students, we can find ways for credit recovery, like they were in Virginia Beach High School and they left after 2 months there. Maybe Hampton doesn't have the exact same program, but we can do something to try to create an opportunity for them to continue what they started, and we can also
Mhm.
recover credits that they may have lost because they were in transit. And yeah, so
yeah,
that's quite
I'd like to give a shout out to Ursula Murphy who's watching, and the reason I'm doing that because she's on the board of the Portsmouth Volunteers for the Homeless, which is executive director Dr. Darlene Sparks Washington heads up that program, which they do yeoman's work here in the city of Portsmouth as far as the homeless. Since we were talking about homeless, I just wanted to shout that group out. And
yeah,
and the good work that they're doing in the city of Portsmouth. As a matter of fact, Portsmouth has, believe the city council has approved building a facility for the homeless, to house the homeless, to temporarily house them and sort of move them into a better situation in their lives. I just wanted to shout that out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had something else to say.
Yeah, just make sure that in Portsmouth that there's some advocacy for children, that these children get their education, because if we can educate them, we can break this cycle of poverty and homelessness if we can just educate the children. Sometimes we're not always able to, even when we put forth our best efforts to get a old guy like me to change his ways and his life and his circumstance, but we can never give up on children. And if we can target those children, then we can make this thing better for future generations. And I want to give out one phone number for your listeners, and this will be helpful to them. This will be helpful for Ms. Murphy and Dr.
Washington.
Yes, it'll be helpful for them. If they ever have a child in Portsmouth and that family is homeless, and the school, which I don't think Portsmouth would do this because my good frat brother, Dr. Bracy, is an awesome superintendent. But if anybody under him doesn't let these children in any reason, they should call Patricia Pop. The last name is Popp, and she is the state coordinator, and she knows every division person responsible for this. And her number is 757-221-7776. She is a national expert on the rights of children experiencing homelessness. Everybody knows her nationwide. I'm going to the national convention November 15th, and it's called NACY, National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. And she's
please come back after that and share some of the information you get.
Right. So my work is with the children, and I would hope that Portsmouth, with all of its great resources, that somebody's out there saying, we got this situation, this family doesn't have a place to live, but we're going to make sure this child is in school every day and they're learning.
I know we're getting ready to close up. I had one follow-up that you mentioned about Katrina and how Katrina changed population, especially in the city of New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Since this is voting time, you have to look at policies that people put in.
Mm-hmm.
Because of Katrina, it was a national but a natural disaster because of that hurricane. The vice president ran that evacuation and ran all of those folks out of New Orleans and ran them to Houston, forever changing the population center in the city of New Orleans. And they actually took over everything and took over the state. And so, but they did that by policy. And so many people were killed, and they just basically wiped out the city, bought people's houses for pennies on a dollar and whatever. But the other piece too, now that we're talking about policies though, so if we don't get out and vote, and Dr. Copeland is talking about what the city does for the homeless children out there, we don't want to get out to become a city that instead of helping our own people, they will get free Trump Bibles with the constitutions in and everything. And that's the only thing they'll get, but they'll still be homeless because Trump believes that. So that's all I got to say. Just had to add that in there, the Trump Bibles.
Yeah.
Thanks, that was important too.
Yes.
Well, I gave the number for, where you can make a call. And Slim, if they call you and say, well, I don't remember that number, call me. I don't have any authority over another school division, but I'll sure help them find out how they can make things work.
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote that number down. So if it comes to, I have it.
All right.
Well, Dr. Copeland, Bruce, I appreciate you coming on again. And like I was saying earlier, after your conference in November, please come back and share whatever information you can that you picked up from that. We really appreciate it. Very invaluable information, more than I expected. But I always expect the unexpected as far as good information whenever you come on our show. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure our listeners appreciated it as well. So thanks everybody for watching. And remember, Postman Coffee Talk is here for our voice, our community, and our future. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Let me get the, make sure we go out.